Hello everybody, my name is Lat Mackey and this is Sequence Break IL, a look at speedrunning, game development, content creation, and everything in between. Thanks so much for being here, listening, watching. I know I keep saying it, but thank you, honestly. It really does mean a lot to me that people are actually listening and watching this, so thank you very much. In this one, we're going to look back at a conversation that I had back in June of 2020 with the folks behind HD Retrovision. And if you're not familiar with HD Retrovision, they make cables that amazingly take the RGB signal in your console and convert it to whatever. I don't know how the magic works. In fact, we get into that in the episode, but basically they give you an output of component signal. And so that you can easily plug it into modern TVs, you can easily plug it into your scalers, you can easily plug it into your capture cards if you have the right devices to do so with that. And it's just amazing the quality that they are able to get out of your console, sometimes with no modification whatsoever. And that's actually how I became familiar with their company, their cables, and what they do. And it was like this, I honestly look back on it as like this really honor that I got a chance to talk with these folks, because there's a lot of amazing work being done in the hardware scene for our retro devices, which nowadays the term retro seems to be expanding. I mean, technically, like PlayStation 3 is a retro console nowadays. I'm like, that thing plays Blu-rays. You can still go to Best Buy and buy Blu-rays. But anyway, you know, the term retro keeps expanding. But the communities that keep popping up and the people who are doing some amazing things on the hardware side of things and on the software side of things are keeping our consoles alive, which is really awesome. All this kind of wonderful support we're seeing. And one of the companies that I think this might've been my first like retro purchase after I picked up a Super Nintendo. It's one of the reasons my first retro console that I purchased, because I still had a couple from when I was a kid, but I never had Super Nintendo growing up as a kid, was the Super Nintendo. And I don't remember even how I Googled or what I came upon, but there was a company, HD Retrovision, that made these cables you just plug right into your Super Nintendo and you can get the 240p RGB signal out of your Super Nintendo. And first of all, I had to figure out what the hell was an RGB signal. What did that mean? What is this 240p thing? How does this all work? What else do I need to buy, you know? And at the time, I had probably never spent more than, you know, like $15 on a cable in my entire life. And I was like, what's the magic behind these things? Why, first of all, you know, why do these things cost more? And what do you get for that money? And I can unequivocally say that it is absolutely worth the value. And you can see why these cables are worth it when you start using them and you see them in practice. And what I went down the rabbit hole, My Life in Gaming, which is a wonderful YouTube channel. If you're not familiar with it, they do a lot of showing off how you can get some of the best quality signals out of your consoles and devices. I did a little behind the scenes, and I'm going to actually link it in the description here because it's a really great primer to what these two guys are all about and what their company does. And that hopefully sets you up for the conversation that I'm about to share here with you, where we kind of go into the backstory on how this all got started, but more importantly, how these cables work and what makes them work the way that they do. Because it's still, I still feel like it's kind of this amazing thing that they're able to do. Some consoles do require modification to get that 240p, that really high quality signal out of them from the 8 and 16-bit eras. But some don't. Genesis being another one, you know, your Model 1 Genesis, you can actually get the RGB signal with some there's some quality things that happen on the Genesis, and you can, I mean, you probably know, if you're watching this, you probably know how much you can modify your consoles nowadays to get the best possible quality sound. So I hope you enjoy kind of this conversation. I also want to recommend, it's no longer a podcast, but Nick and Steve used to do a podcast with Retro RGB and Voltar, and it was a lot of fun. I don't remember exactly how many episodes they did, but you may want to go back if you enjoy this type of conversation. All of those folks have some really great banter back and forth, and it helped me research this conversation a little bit. And this is episode releasing at the very beginning of December. And if you're looking for something to perhaps give the retro enthusiast in your life, maybe you want to consider these. I've used just their straight up component cables, which are wonderful. Their PlayStation 3 cables are awesome and amazing. And they do some real, I was able to plug my PlayStation 3 into a CRT TV. Why would you want to do that? That was just for fun. I don't know. But what was really more important is that I could actually send it into my scaler if I wanted to do that. There's some really interesting things you can do. They have great Wii cables. In fact, what I have plugged in right now, I use the Genesis cables, are always plugged in to my TurboGrafx 16 into the scaler and stuff like that. But I think at this point I've purchased six different cables from them, and not one of them has had any sort of issue whatsoever. And the awesome thing still to this day that is, if you have any sort of customer support issue, when you email them, you get to talk to Nick and Steve, the people who are running. It's literally just two guys, and they talk about that, how challenging it can be with, especially with how big the retro community has gotten. It's still amazing that just these two guys are the ones doing it. I don't know if they've ever brought in any help later on to maybe help with certain things, but they're still doing some really awesome and amazing things. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you want to listen to the whole thing, I'm just sharing a clip here. Please feel free. This was episode 29 back in June of 2020. Nick and Steve from HD Retrovision. Enjoy. How did you guys meet, and when did you guys gaming together? How'd that work?
We met in freshman year of high school. We had
seventh period lunch.
Yeah, we had seventh period lunch together. We also had math class together. I can't remember if we had any other classes or just those.
I think that was the only one that we were in the same period for, but we were in the same biology class, just at different times.
And then I was originally going to go out for the track team as a sprinter, but Steve convinced me that the sprinters were lame and that I should do
all the
long
math
distance
nerds,
running.
All the math nerds did long distance running. So I just told them to course correct right there.
Yeah, because I played basketball through winter, which that wipes out your indoor track season. So I didn't join freshman year until outdoor. And so Steve had already been running for a while, and he knew the ropes. So that changed the course. I was going to be a 100-meter sprinter, and Steve
You're going to be like the number one 100-meter sprinter, and now you're like a number 6 800-meter runner. So I was doing this engineering class in, when was it? This was like 2007, 2008. And we had to do like a small project at the end of the semester, and one of the things was I always hated how Shadowrun on Sega Genesis, I could barely read the text on it. And so I did my own research. I found you could get RGB to component converters. They're always labeled wrong. And so that was one of the things. I'm like, if these are labeled wrong, maybe, I don't know, the insides aren't good. So I'm just going to make my own. And so that was the start of this project. It was just meant to be a thing. This is just for me. And I really liked the result. I was using it myself when I was playing Genesis. I had this goofy circuit with wires hanging everywhere. It was kind of crazy, but that was just sitting in my basement for a while, finished school. And then when I got out of school, I wanted to work in this kind of video field, and there aren't a lot of jobs for that. So I'm I'm just going to make my own job. I'm going to make stuff. And then I think it was it was on Nick's wedding when I flew over to Maryland. I'm you want to start an LLC? We could just, I don't know, make stuff maybe if we want. I don't care. He's sure. Hit up the legal Zoom.
Yep.
Got the actual LLC founded, and then Nick got really obsessed with Kickstarter. He's we need to do a Kickstarter. We need to do a Kickstarter. I'm I don't know if I really want to do a Kickstarter. It's responsibility and stuff. It's not my thing. And I don't know if Nick, you want to take it from here? Do you want to explain what happened after that?
I mean, I still maintain that Kickstarter was a good thing. Sorry about the dogs; they kind of freak out sometimes.
Yeah, they don't like Kickstarter either.
Yeah, right, apparently they're voicing it.
But yeah, I mean, Kickstarter. There's a lot of pros and cons to it. Would we do one again? No, but I think in a lot of ways it was necessary to raise awareness for what we were doing, raise capital to do an initial run. Although you learn a lot of lessons doing this, like what did we raise, like $40,000 or $50,000? That's actually not a lot of money to do a manufacturing run. We kicked in quite a bit of our own money to actually pay for it.
It's like a 401k plan. We had to match it.
So yeah, there was a lot of initial capital sunk into that out of our own pockets too. So yeah, like I never, to this day, when I see like some of these Kickstarters, even for like software projects, people, making games like pixel games or whatever in Unity, like, and they raise 40,000-50,000. I'm like, that's not a lot of money.
Not even a salary for a full-time developer a lot of times.
Those aren't big numbers, and well, I think that people never ask for enough because they're afraid that it looks greedy, but getting stuff done is really expensive. And I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but Kickstarter lets you learn a lot of these things for the first time.
Like what we were trying to do at first was trying to get the sub-assemblies made overseas and everything put together here.
And by sub-assembly, he means like you got the circuit board as one sub-assembly, the 5 RCA cable that goes out to your TV is another sub-assembly, the plastic box that encases the circuit board, that's a sub-assembly, and then the piece that goes to your console. So these are all like pieces that you would manufacture and put together.
All these other different things are different parts.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the idea was to do that. Actually, the original prototype. I don't know how detailed you want to go into this, but the original prototype for the Super Nintendo was the circuit board was small enough to fit into that plug part that actually goes into Super Nintendo. Like all the circuitry was in there. But we were trying to make something similar for the Genesis, where it would also fit in the part that actually plugs in to the console. And I was discussing with some friends. We were coming back from a trip to E3, and we were like just hashing ideas out. And we thought of that it would probably be better to just, because we can get the connectors for sure, and we could like break it out into like a little box thingy. And that's how that came to be. We were gonna have not built into the connector, but slightly away from the connector, and then that way we just need to change the parts on the circuit board, because I don't know if some people overlook that, but the parts on the circuit board and the Super Nintendo Genesis are different because one is tuned for the other one. And another like small detail that if you weren't in the Kickstarter and following updates was we used to have 3 discrete cable assemblies. The first from the conception of the Kickstarter, it was Genesis 1, Genesis 2, and Super Nintendo. And once we like found out our main manufacturing path that we ended up using, we found out that we weren't going to hit minimum order quantities at all. Like Nick mentioned, we had to put in some of our own money to get the right quantities. But also for the Genesis and 1 and 2, we definitely weren't going to hit that. So we combined the 1 and 2 together into just the Genesis cable. I used the Genesis 2 connector, and then we made the small adapter that kind of mimics the Genesis 32X adapter that they ship in the box that lets you use the Genesis 2 cable, the Genesis 1 Master System, things like that. So that was in the middle of like the transfer to production process, where we changed all those little details. And so I'm going to go into details. You tell me if it gets boring.
This is fascinating.
But the way that the cables, we make the circuitry for the cables, we test a bunch of consoles. Like we wrote our own test software, so you don't have to assume that whoever programmed the test software did it correctly. So we made our own test software, and we measure everything on oscilloscopes using these test patterns. And then we kind of looked at the data, and let's say for Super Nintendo, like the data kind of congregated in two main locations. And so the contrast switch on the Super Nintendo cable kind of like flips you between those two kind of statistical peaks.
Oh, okay.
And the Genesis 1 also had that where there was two peaks, and the Genesis 2 had two peaks. So when I had to combine the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 into one circuit, you kind of have to combine those four peaks into two kind of semi-peaks.
Right. After all this work you've put into this stuff, do you still enjoy like playing games and getting into the retro stuff at this point?
I go through phases myself. Like I haven't played a game in a couple months now. Like early in the year, I was clearing a few things off the backlog, and Steve and I have been playing a little bit of Diablo 2 on occasion. That's been fun. But I haven't cleared off anything from the backlog in a couple months, like I said. But yeah, I still enjoy it. Still enjoy going back to Diablo 2 and doing some bail runs.
For me, I actually since we started the company, the only game like heavy gaming I would get is the day after Thanksgiving, like that whole weekend. Me and a couple of my friends, we do this thing where we block out the whole weekend and we play like a couch co-op game that's around like four people. Like one of them was, I don't know if you're familiar with Shining Soul for Game Boy Advance. Yeah. It's kind of like Secret of Mana, but like Diablo 2 dungeon grinding. And it's 4-player for Game Boy Advance, and so we have 4 TVs with 4 GameCube players.
That is so cool.
So we sit on the couch and play that. That's like an example of just like a 4-player like couch co-op game that we would just binge play, and that would be it like for the year of like games I would play. But then like recently, I've just kind of getting more burnt out, and when the Final Fantasy VII remake came out, I plowed through that. That was the first like single player game that I probably played in a decade. Was that.
Thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free, subscribe, like, leave a comment, all that stuff people say at the end of a video. It honestly all goes a long way to help the podcast. Thank you so much. If you want to join us on Discord, we chat mostly about food, but occasionally we do talk about the stuff that's in the podcast. The link is in the show notes or in the description. Feel free. Come on by. Join us. If you want to follow on Twitter, Sequence Break PC. Sequence Break PC. I post when I go live. It's kind of not at a set time, so if you want to see the live feed of the podcast, feel free, follow there. And finally, if you want to email, podcast@sequencebreakpodcast.com. Sequencebreakpodcast.com is also where you can find the backlog of all of the episodes. It's also on YouTube as well, so feel free, join in, have some fun. Thank you so much. I will see ya in the next one.